Our next topic is advancing the science, the latest in Alzheimer's and dementia research. And we're really fortunate today to have Susan Howland with us. She's a gerontologist and senior director of programs with the Alzheimer's Association in Southern California. And she is responsible for the delivery of care and support programs in the organization's 7-county territory. And in addition, she's a research champion for Central and Southern California and delivers research-related topics to the general public, which we're going to hear about today. She's worked in the field of aging and Alzheimer's disease for over 25 years and has received numerous national awards recognizing her contributions in the field, including the Rosalind Carter Leadership and Caregiving Award. She has a master's degree in gerontology from the University of Southern California. Susan, thank you for joining us. Hello, hello.
Oh. I'm not even going to ask.
Yes.
Okay, we're good to go. So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for having us here today. So I'm Susan, so I'm going to be your primary speaker. And then I'd like to introduce you to some of my colleagues or have them come up and introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Savannah Levine. I'm a program and education manager with the Alzheimer's Association, part of the California Southland chapter. I cover the greater San Fernando Valley with care and support services. So we have free education, support groups, care consultations with our 24/7 helpline. And I am also joined by a couple of my colleagues, so they're going to introduce themselves. Thank you very much.
This is going to be this short purple parade for about 2 seconds. My name is Tina Wilson, and I'm also with the Alzheimer's Association, and I am a program and education specialist, and I support Savannah in the greater San Fernando Valley, as well as Antelope Valley and Santa Clarita.
And my name is Donna Cohen, and I am the Senior Walk Manager for Walk to End Alzheimer's, and I oversee including the San Fernando Valley Walk, Santa Clarita Walk, and the Santa Monica Walk.
Did anyone else get some Sound of Music vibes from that? We were trying to figure out how we could all line up and sing to you. Or was that just me? Okay. So I have a couple rules for you. You can pretty much ask me anything, but with that, I can guarantee I'm not going to be able to answer all of your questions. I've been doing this for more like 30 years, and someone always stumps me. I'm not putting that out there as a challenge, but someone's going to stump me. And if I am making absolutely no sense, just stop me. You can tell me I'm making no sense. Or sometimes I'll geek out on data, and you can tell me just to move on because I'm getting a little boring. So those fair rules? Okay. I'm not used to have just a clicker, so you're going to see the back of my head a lot. So for those of you who are not, still can't hear? Okay. Okay. So I now have a microphone and a clicker, so I'm not going to be able to give a presentation. Hands aren't moving. As mentioned, we're with the Alzheimer's Association, and just a little bit about us. You know, we are a national organization really dedicated to Alzheimer's as well as all other dementia. And locally, we do a lot of program delivery for those impacted by the disease. We also do a lot in the area of awareness, advocacy, as well as research, which is what I'm going to focus on today. So, now you don't even know. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about Alzheimer's dementia, the importance of early detection, some treatment updates, as well as risk reduction strategies. Does that sound fair to you? Would you tell me if not? Okay. So always a good place to start is the beginning. And so a couple of the next slides might be basic to some of you, but I like them just because they're kind of a level setting. So we're using the same terminology. We're starting from the same starting point. So these are our facts and figures. New ones will come out at the end of the month, but there are about 7 million Americans who are living with Alzheimer's disease and a related dementia. And we know that number is only going to increase pretty rapidly. Right now, Alzheimer's disease kills more individuals than breast cancer and prostate cancer combined. And as we're seeing, which is great, people surviving cancer, living with heart disease, we're seeing those death rates go down, but the death rate for Alzheimer's is skyrocketing. And we also know that certain individuals have higher prevalence rates of developing Alzheimer's disease or dementia. Women, Black African Americans, and Latino Hispanics. Was that a surprise? Yeah, kind of interesting. So what is dementia? That's probably the question I'm asked most. So without reading my slide back to me, how would you describe dementia? As what? As confusion. What else? Loss of memory. Recent memory, yes. So dementia really is just a word that describes a collection of symptoms and changes in cognition, usually decline in cognition. It doesn't tell you actually what's going on in the brain. So Alzheimer's disease has a pathology that's occurring in the brain that causes those dementia symptoms. Other reasons why individuals might have those dementia symptoms would be vascular dementia, which is really a disruption of blood flow, oxygen, nutrients to the brain. Usually you see that with like a transient ischemic attack, so a small stroke. Other kind of top 4 or 5 reasons why someone has dementia. Lewy body. Has anyone heard of Lewy body? Yeah. Increasing, and I almost went down a rabbit hole and I jumped back out. Frontal temporal, which again is a different disease pathology, as well as others like Huntington's disease. What's I think kind of interesting is that it's increasingly understood that individuals don't have just a pure Alzheimer's disease. Oftentimes there are other dementias or other pathologies that are occurring in the brain at one time. Whoops. There we go. So what are the hallmark signs of Alzheimer's disease? What is that pathology that's occurring in the brain causing the loss of memory, confusion, especially kind of issues around recent memory? So starting on the far left, you have plaques. So plaques are this kind of abnormal protein that kind of clumps together to form plaques in the brain, and these occur between brain cells. There are also tangles, and those occur inside the brain cell, and it's almost as if like the structure of the cell is almost unraveling. And it's thought that the presence of those plaques and the tangles leads to neurodegeneration, so cellular death. So on the far right, you see a brain of someone who's healthy and then a brain of someone who has later stage Alzheimer's. And what are some noticeable changes that you see? Smaller. So it's actually smaller, lighter in weight, and those fluid-filled ventricle areas are significantly larger as well. Okay. I didn't tell you I couldn't hold a mic and advance the clicker. Okay, so Alzheimer's disease occurs on a continuum. So on the far left, you have individuals that have that pathology occurring in the brain, the plaques and the tangles and the neurodegeneration. However, individuals could be asymptomatic. So it's now known that someone can have those plaques and tangles forming in the brain upwards of 20 to 25 years before they start having symptoms. Kind of a surprise. Some individuals who are asymptomatic will then progress in what's called mild cognitive impairment. So individuals will have changes in cognition that's noticeable, but not significant enough to interfere with their day-to-day life. And then some individuals with that mild cognitive impairment will move on to Alzheimer's disease, kind of the early, middle, late stages. Questions, thoughts? Everyone's good? So what is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? It's asked in every single class we teach. Basically, dementia is a term that just describes the changes in cognition, and Alzheimer's is the reason for those changes. So it's important to know the difference, and it's also important to go to the doctor to get a differential diagnosis, because how Alzheimer's is treated is different than like vascular dementia. Excellent. Okay. In half an hour, it will take me to change a slide. Okay. I don't know if I'm just not pointing it at the right spot. Okay, so I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about early detection. I mean, maybe I need... Okay. So we believe that early detection is important for a variety of reasons, and there are a lot of benefits to individuals and families around that early detection. One is kind of a medical component. So individuals who are diagnosed earlier actually can participate in clinical trials, which is really how we're ultimately going to find a cure. And we also know individuals who have been diagnosed with early stage Alzheimer's who engage in like healthier lifestyles. There's one gentleman who actually, he and his wife both lost a combined 100 pounds. So again, healthier living. We know that there are also emotional and social benefits. Individuals who are diagnosed earlier can still make decisions, financial, legal, how I'd like to live the rest of my life. We have a lot of people who celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary, maybe when they've only been married 47 years. But again, making decisions about how to live your life. And then there's some financial costs. So individuals who are diagnosed earlier tend not to go through as many testing and actually have fewer ER visits and hospitalizations. So do you think it's easy to get an early diagnosis? No. Why do you say that? I need to buy time to advance my slide. Why do you think it might be hard? Yes. Yeah, so you can't get an appointment with a doctor who can actually do the diagnosing, definitely. What else? And it's also difficult to make a differential diagnosis. It's not a simple one test that will diagnose, absolutely. So to have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, there is no single test available. It's not, someone wants an x-ray, somebody just wants a quick. It's not the case. It's a pretty involved process that involves cognitive testing, physical exam, neurological testing. The area that's emerging, which may be new, hopefully, is kind of this whole area of like biomarkers, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk a little bit about. So biomarkers are basically something in your body that you can measure that can indicate the presence as well as progression of a disease or condition. So we're pretty familiar with biomarkers. Think of what is the magic number for cholesterol? 200. Think about A1C levels. So these are all kind of biomarkers. So why they are important for Alzheimer's is it would help in the diagnostic process. It also could include individuals in clinical trials more easily. And it also can potentially predict who might be at higher risk of developing Alzheimer's in later life. So the biomarkers that are currently used with Alzheimer's disease are scans, which are the PET scans and MRIs, looking at the structure and function of the brain. Those are covered by Medicare and CMS. There's cerebral spinal fluid, so again, looking at biomarkers through a lumbar puncture, and blood biomarkers, which are really emerging. The bottom right-hand side. So there are a couple studies right now that are looking at retinal scans. So that plaque in the brain is thought to deposit on the back of your retina. So potentially, you could go get your eyes checked, have a retinal scan to look at the deposits of plaque from the brain. Pretty cool. So we're not quite there yet, so I'm just going to bore you with lots of blood. Yes? So the scans that are typically used, one is, I'm getting out of my, are they the typical ones? I'm phoning a friend. The question was around what type of scans. Are they the typical scans that are used, or is it something that, the jury to my right says yes. It's a collection here. You got 4 brains. Okay. So moving on to blood biomarkers, this is really amazing. Why would blood biomarkers be handy? So definitely you could know earlier if you have a disease. It's less invasive. It's cheaper, and oftentimes it can be scaled up. I think sometimes we forget about the resources we have available to us in Los Angeles, but this would be great. We also have an office in Bakersfield, and for them to have specialty care, they have to come down here. That's incredible. So wouldn't it be handy to have like a blood biomarker or a blood panel that they could use up in use anywhere? So with this one study that came out, they were looking at, does a blood biomarker, a blood test, aid in accurately diagnosing? And in this case, it's yes. The accuracy was about 90%. So going back to some of the challenges between how to do a differential diagnosis, this would hopefully cut down that time. So any guesses the accuracy of making an Alzheimer's diagnosis with a neurologist? How often are they accurate without a blood test? Some people in the back, really bad news. So it is 70%. And through the primary care physician, it's running about 60%. So again, this blood biomarker actually can aid and assist in that accuracy of the diagnosis. I think it's kind of cool. So right now, there are some blood tests on the market. They're just not FDA approved yet, meaning that they have not been able to validate yet what is being seen as the biomarkers in the blood and what is occurring in the brain. So that's the process that's occurring right now. Also, the Alzheimer's Association is leading some efforts. If a blood biomarker like panel becomes available, what are the clinical guidelines for its use within a primary care practice? So that's kind of where things are sitting right now. Yes? So what are they looking for in the... So right now, looking for these blood biomarkers, they're looking at some plaque indicators. What came out most recently was p-tau 217, which honestly isn't that the sexiest name of anything you've ever heard. p-tau 217. And that actually is a more valid indicator of measuring the tau, those tangles in the brain, and the presence of amyloid. There are also other biomarkers that they have identified for Lewy body and other types of dementia. So, ideally it would be like a panel that could assess, kind of risk and presence of some of the other dementias. So that's potentially with use of a blood biomarker. So in the clinical studies where physicians used the blood biomarker in assisting with the diagnosis was about 90% accurate. Primary care, it's about 60%. Without neurologists, about 70% without a blood biomarker. I also heard a physician say they're 90% accurate when they remove your appendix. So I don't know if that's reassuring or not. Maybe not. Okay. Yes?
What are the chances of a huge depression in oneself if you get an inaccurate one or even an accurate one?
Oh, this is our first moral question of the day. So it is, what is sort of the emotional impact? So, you have me down a rabbit hole already. So what is the emotional impact of knowing that you might have these biomarkers? So pretty significant. So sit back, I'm going down a rabbit hole. So right now, there is one gene that's loosely tied to an increased risk in Alzheimer's, and it is the APOE. You can have a protective 4 or high risk 4, protective 2. So people wanted to know. But the biggest challenge is still, like, I could have the high risk and not develop Alzheimer's, and my brother could have the low risk and develop Alzheimer's. So there is that, it's nothing as predictive yet. The other piece that kind of is interesting is that I've heard physicians say, I'll do the APOE test, and then I'm going to throw away the results because I don't want that to go into your medical record. Which, again, we're just layering ethics on top of ethics. But I think there are ramifications if you do test, if you are at greater risk of Alzheimer's, what does that mean for your driver's license? Long-term care insurance, a whole host of other things. So I think that ethics piece is just a whole nother day. Okay, that was a rabbit hole, and I'm sorry. And I feel like I've opened up a couple others. Yes?
I've read or heard that tinnitus or tinnitus is a pre-risk
So is, now I can't, ringing of the ears, can I just say that?
Yes,
Ringing in the ears is like a precursor or a predictive of Alzheimer's. I haven't heard that one. What I do have a slide on hearing, but it's not ringing of the ears.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Yes, I have a very beloved friend who is now suffering, and I don't know, is it dementia or is it Alzheimer's? And how do you make that differential diagnosis?
So for us, we can't. And honestly, for us as a friend, it doesn't matter what that label is. It's, we still care for that person. So with the differential diagnosis, like I said, we can't do it. But it would be, Alzheimer's disease is a very predictable pattern of cellular death in the brain, starting at the hippocampus with recent memories and kind of working its way forward. And it is a pretty predictable pathway that individuals can kind of assess where a person is. Something like vascular dementia tends to be kind of more of a stepwise decline. So my grandmother had a TIA. Her cognitive function dropped, and she plateaued. And where that TIA occurred is going to be where kind of the symptoms and deficits occurred. Something like Lewy body tends to have a lot more communication issues, both understanding and expressing and understanding, a lot more hallucinations, kind of some societal norms are kind of forgotten, and then frontal temporal, international sign of frontal temporal, has other types of symptoms. Oh. So kind of the trigger in this case was a lot of life events. So kind of how does it interact if like life events change and kind of trigger some of the changes in cognition? Maybe I won't answer your question, but if you haven't noticed, I really am blind as a bat. I mean, I can't function without my glasses. But in the middle of the night, if I want a glass of water, I don't need to put on my glasses. I can get out of bed, I know where the dog sleeps, I know where the squeaky floorboard is, I can navigate to the kitchen, get my water, back to bed. So sometimes when we live in such a familiar environment, that supports our cognition. And when we are changed or move into a different situation, we then have to actually lean into our memory to learn a new routine. That was long-winded. Okay, I'm being pointed to the back.
Hi, I'm going to avoid a rabbit hole if at all possible, okay? Earlier in the presentation, I understood you to say in one of the slides about the benefits of getting an early test. One person got his affairs in order, somebody else celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary at 47 years. And then I thought I just heard you say that we don't have anything that's predictive, okay? So I'm wondering, what's the value of taking one of these tests if it doesn't really indicate something's going to happen?
So I think two things. One, I think when somebody does have cognitive decline and symptoms that do interfere with day-to-day life, a diagnosis is important because there is medication. However, I think there are also assessing one's risk, looking at those biomarkers, also some lifestyle issues and genetics. So in that case, can I put a pin in you for a minute? Because I kind of have a slide.
Yeah, in fact, do you want to continue on and then we'll take some more questions a little later?
Yeah, we'll see how, maybe my clicker and I are friends. Okay. Is treatment of interest? Okay. I got a whole range of emotions. So I'm going to go a little quickly, so apologies. So one of the challenges, going back to kind of why I think a lot of people have not gotten a diagnosis or have not pursued evaluations, is just because what can be done. So about 90 years after Dr. Alzheimer's identified this disease, the first medication actually hit the market. And these are what are called almost cognitive enhancers. So it helps a person for a bit of time, but it doesn't do anything to change that underlying pathology of the disease. So while somebody is taking Aricept or Exelon, those plaques, tangles, and neurodegeneration is still occurring. About 3 years ago, a new class of medication came out that's FDA approved, and these are monoclonal antibodies. So this is the first time there is medication on the market that actually addresses the plaque buildup in the brain. And so there are 3, but really only 2 are currently prescribed. And what they do is either stall the plaque buildup, break it up, remove it from the body. So individuals who have been in the clinical trials for these monoclonal antibodies actually are early, mild cognitive impairment or early stage, and they actually plateau for about a year. So not only are the plaques removed from the brain, which was statistically significant, people have had real benefit to their day-to-day functioning. So that's kind of interesting. Have you heard about the monoclonal antibodies? Got a little bit of a storied past. Does anyone have any questions? How can Stephanie have a question?
Clarifying, on these new set of medications, how are they given? If they're all, what kind of formulation is it? Is it a pill or how is it provided? And are they all offered right now? If you can just kind of review some of those.
So for the new ones, it's all infusion, different schedules. One is once a month, one is twice a month or every 2 weeks. Aduhelm, is actually no longer available. It had, do you want the nitty gritty? Okay. So we know of people who are in treatment right now and actually do benefit from it. It is through an infusion center. There are a couple clinical trials right now looking at just kind of a subcutaneous shot. So that might be a little bit more liberating in the future. But lecanemab and donanemab are on market and used.
And is that by a general practitioner? Like, what doctor would be providing that service?
So who would provide that service? So it would probably be the person that has diagnosed the Alzheimer's disease. There are side effects, as there are with all medications, and it does require some monitoring and some additional scans because of those side effects. Yes?
Yeah, I've heard of a medication called memantine. What does that do?
So, memantine? Yeah. So
Memantine, I think.
that is more of like a glutamate regulator. So what I can't tell you specifically what it does. What I can tell you, it was available overseas before FDA approved it, and everyone went to Canada to get their memantine. So FDA approved it pretty quickly. It just, I have heard more aha moments with like the Aricept, the Leqembi, than I have with memantine. But memantine is now commonly prescribed with like an Aricept. So I know that didn't really adequately answer your question. Anyone in the peanut gallery answer more on memantine? Okay. Okay. Also, there have been 2 new medications for individuals with the disease. One is around sleep. Oftentimes there's a sleep disturbance, and the other is around agitation, which those are great, especially for family caregivers. Okay. There we go. Okay, this is too slow for me. So I think a couple points here. Historically, we've only looked at plaques and tangles for Alzheimer's disease. And right now, there are about 127 other unique therapies being studied. We don't know a lot about this disease. So we need as many different thoughts and lenses and trials as possible. One of the biggest issues with clinical trials is we're currently short over 65,000 individuals, which is a challenge because we need people to participate in clinical trials to find effective treatments and cures and kind of risk reduction strategies. The other piece that I think is interesting is that most of the medication being tested right now is to modify the disease, to stall, slow, or stop the progression, which I thought was interesting. There we go. So the one takeaway from here that I think is interesting is that about 28% of therapies that are currently being looked at, studied for Alzheimer's, are actually repurposed for other diseases. And that's really important because we know some real-world safety issues, implementation issues. So this is one study that was produced or released last summer, and it looked at those GLP-1s, so Ozempic, Wegovy. So this study was on about 200 individuals who have mild cognitive impairment or early stage Alzheimer's, and they took this GLP-1 for a year. They initially were studying blood, kind of like glucose metabolism, but what was really interesting is that individuals who were on this drug for a year had reduced cognitive decline by as much as 18% compared to placebo. The other piece that was really interesting is the areas of the brain where we normally see Alzheimer's disease had a 50% reduction in shrinkage. So that's pretty significant. So hopefully some of these other drugs that are currently in use can benefit the brain as well. Okay. There we go. Risk reduction. So we can do two things. We have 25 minutes. I can go through risk reduction, or we can do questions and you can badger me more. We'll do risk reduction, and then you can badger me. Okay. So this is that idea that there's some things we can't modify. We can't modify our age. We can't modify our genetics. However, there are a lot of other factors that we can have control over, and these all may impact our brain. So traumatic brain injury. So that's kind of a no-duh. So individuals who have traumatic brain injuries tend to have cognitive decline and have a higher rate of Alzheimer's in later life. Substance use. So again, alcohol is getting a really bad rap these days, as it should, but individuals who have had greater use of alcohol and other drugs doesn't do so great for the brain in later life. Physical activity has historically had the strongest evidence around benefiting the brain and almost protecting it. Education, so individuals who have more years of formal education, it tends to be a protective factor in later life for cognitive decline. Environmental and lifestyle factors. I have a slide up on wildfires in a minute. Cardiovascular health, so every time your heart pumps, 25% of that blood goes straight to your brain. So anything that impacts your heart kind of impacts your brain. Sleep, both quantity, quality, as well as use of sleep aids. So when we sleep, that is just an opportunity for our brain to almost cleanse itself. And when we don't have adequate sleep or quality of sleep, that interferes with that cleansing of the brain. Diet has been increasingly tied to, of course, heart health, exercise, and then cognitive and social engagement. The two factors that are kind of both non-modifiable and modifiable are race, ethnicity, as well as sex and gender. So we do know that 2/3 of individuals with Alzheimer's are women. Why do you think that might be? We definitely live longer. There might be some other factors, some biological and lifestyle factors. So there we go. So this study I just think is interesting. So it's women who have some sort of gestational hypertension obviously during pregnancy, have about a 2.75 higher rate of vascular dementia in later life. So interesting to know. Again, it also identifies how all of our risk factors are different. But I also like this because it points out that we can't just start thinking of a brain when we hit 85 or 75 or 65 or 50. that brain health needs to be kind of thought of as like across the lifespan. And so this is one of the things that reminds me of that. Other interesting studies. So what about heredity? So long-winded answer. So there are some, I should be trying to click while I answer, shouldn't I? So there are some genes that if mutated, you will develop Alzheimer's disease. There. Oh, now we went too far. Okay, we might just live with that. But that's a pretty strong footprint in a family. There was this documentary out many years ago, and the mom developed Alzheimer's in her mid-40s. She actually had 10 children, which that was a shocker to me. And during the filming of the documentary, 7 of the 10 kids either passed away from Alzheimer's, had Alzheimer's, or were diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So it's a pretty big footprint. For most of us, you know, I had 2 grandmothers and 2 aunts. So we talk about increasing and decreasing risk. We talked a little bit about that APOE. We could have the high risk 4, the buffer 2, but it's not predictive. So you talk about increasing and decreasing risks, you know, kind of up and down a little bit. So having 4 blood relatives, it increases my risk, but it doesn't make it predictive, if that makes sense.
We had a speaker here who said that the risk, that I should get tested. And my sister, who passed away subsequently from a heart problem, she and I discussed it and we decided we don't want to know. So it's a scary thing to know, you know, because she was great. She taught yoga till she was 95, but she had dementia. She forgot the keys in the door. She left the stove on. Those were the things. It wasn't Alzheimer's. That's scary for me. And I wonder about my lifestyle, which is pretty beneficial generally, is a deterrent.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, we just don't know. I think because Alzheimer's impacts our brain, I think that has a different heaviness to it than, say, you know, I grew up in a house with a smoker, so I probably am at risk of developing lung cancer. But that still seems a little bit more fixable than the brain, and I think that's because the science isn't there. A lot of the research that's emerging is supporting the idea that if we engage in these healthy lifestyles, that actually does mitigate some of the increased risk associated with like genetics. So I don't have a crystal ball for you. Okay. I don't know. Oh, there you are. Oh, yes.
The question that was asked originally in the beginning was about use of other kind of testing, and we didn't really mention, can you hear me now? You may not want to.
Sorry.
Was about CAT scanning, which is usually done after the initial physical exam by the general practitioner or internist, and then subsequently by a neurologist. They would order a CAT scan because it can be done quickly, and if you don't have any contraindications like problematic in terms of taking an X-ray, it can be done, you know, within 15 or 20 minutes, and you're not enclosed in the MRI, which would be the next test. And if you don't have any contraindications to that, there are variations above that, including PET scanning, P-E-T. And why this is so important is because there are also variations in terms of dementia that occur with concomitant other diseases that you have to exclude, as you mentioned, including things like Parkinson's disease, and Lewy body disease, as you also mentioned, but other kinds of inflammatory diseases, which I don't think were included, including rheumatic diseases like lupus. So those can be screened for in terms of by blood testing, but the actual follow-up in terms of the testing must include CAT scanning and the MRI and PET scanning, and then it gets very much more complicated when you start looking for amyloid plaques versus the Lewy body plaques versus things that you might see with Parkinson's, which may occur subsequently and not at the same time. So it gets much more complicated. And the other thing that I wanted to comment on was about the monoclonal antibodies and the use of that and how that's become, you know, sort of up in the air as to who should get these agents, because are you really finding these things on these scans, and can they be adequately followed? Hopefully in the future we'll have much better scanning techniques.
So I think kind of
Can you hear me now?
So I think Alzheimer's used to be known as a diagnosis of elimination. You know, everything else is ruled out, so it's probable Alzheimer's disease, absolutely. The other thing with the scans is it wasn't until maybe last summer, about a year ago, that they actually were covered by insurance. You know, CMS approved them to be part of that diagnostic tool. So I think scans are going to be utilized more as part of the diagnostic process. So. Okay, give me some good juju so my clicker's working. So the slide we skipped over actually was a Lancet Commission dementia report, and it stated that upwards of 40% of all-cause dementia, Alzheimer's, Lewy, whatever, can be prevented, or not prevented, stalled or delayed through healthy lifestyles. Pretty remarkable. And by layering those, it actually had an added benefit. Did I skip one? I think I did skip one. So a couple of the research studies I just wanted to highlight. One is about diet. So about 2 years ago, a study came out that suggested that individuals who consume more than 20% of their daily caloric intake from ultra-processed food had about a 28% faster rate of cognitive decline. So we haven't had, okay. And then another study came out this past summer. I just must not be pointing at the right place. There we go. That actually looked at processed red meat, and that individuals who consume more than 2 servings a week, it's associated with about a 14% higher risk of dementia. So it's processed red meat, so really good stuff. Whatever I ate at Trader Joe's last night that they were offering up. Yes?
She fell and fractured her pelvis when she was about 88, 89, and she went into subacute rehab center. She was there for about 2 months, maybe a little more, and they doped her up, terribly so, and she was supposed to come live near us. She was living in New York at the time and then came out to California to live near us, and she had been in delirium when she came out of the subacute rehab center and had aged horribly. And I had to bring her to a gerontologist, which we got into through connections. And he said she doesn't have Alzheimer's, but he said I had to wean her off all this stuff that she had been put on, and that she may come out of this and may be herself again, or she may not, or she'll be partly there. So anyway, as soon as the longer she was off the stuff, I'm talking about years, she was more herself. Now, she was not very active physically, but mentally, she was mostly there, and she was just diminished. That's how I used to describe her. She was mostly diminished, and the more she was socializing, the more she was herself.
Yeah, I think we saw that during the pandemic where individuals who were isolated, especially with Alzheimer's, just really did not do well. And I think the other piece is, delirium, depression, and dementia all kind of look the same. And oftentimes when there is some type of hospitalization, there is delirium, especially with older adults, and oftentimes the health care staff assumes that is their baseline rather than that is a byproduct of that hospitalization and other things. So socialization is pretty important. My aunt lived until she was 99 and 11 months. And she had friends all over the country because she wanted to get a postage stamp to commemorate dogs who have been part of wars. Okay, maybe not my thing, maybe not your thing, but she did it. But again, staying cognitively active is pretty important. So I'm going to skip some of these. So the one that I thought was interesting that's tied to that is around volunteering. So individuals who volunteer tend to do better on memory and thinking tests, and the more volunteering, the bigger that boost and bump, which kind of makes sense because individuals who volunteer, it's social, it's cognitive, it's probably physical to some degree, and there is that altruistic benefit as well. So again, looking at things that people can do. Yes?
I just wanted to ask you a real simple question. Is there any validity when a primary physician has you draw the clock? And if you go online, they also say that could be the beginning. And also when they give you 3 words, then have a lengthy conversation and then ask you to repeat those 3 words.
So that is one of the tests that has been around to kind of look at different areas of the brain and kind of how they're doing. I wouldn't say it would be the only test. Like if you were to ask me to spell the word world backwards, I couldn't do it because I'm a bad speller. But there is some validity. So for the clock drawing, I think they say, make a clock. Again, what is my kid going to do with his digital watch? And put the hands to say like 2:15. So what you do see, so most of us could pretty much rough it out. Maybe mine wouldn't be a perfect circle, but we could rough it out. But what you do see with people who are having changes in cognition, maybe dementia, maybe not, maybe all the numbers are just clustered together, the hands are awkward, so there is some sort of validity that tests that part of the brain.
It helps a neurologist understand what parts of the brain might be affected. So there's a whole number of tests, like you listed a few of them. So depending on how a person responds, it focuses you on different parts of the brain. So it's just part of an evaluation, a mental status exam, a cognitive exam.
Okay. All right. The other one I was going to put up, I just think it's interesting. I liked the study before the recent fires, but it is looking at, actually it occurred in Southern California through Kaiser members, and that wildfire tends to have a higher particulate matter, which seems to increase the likelihood of someone developing dementia. It has nothing to do with kind of Palisades and everything else that burned, but it's the wildfire, even with lower exposure than, say, exposure to like cars and factories and things like that. So I just thought that was interesting because it was also large scale and it was also here locally. So what I'm going to do is let Donna talk a little bit about our walk, and then I'm going to, up there, I'm going to try to click the slides. Yeah. and then we can do Q&A for like 4 minutes. I'll keep trying.
Do you have to point at that thing? I don't know. Just real quick, as I mentioned earlier, I am the walk manager that oversees the San Fernando Valley Walk to End Alzheimer's. And so the first thing I wanted to find out, how many of you have ever participated in one of our walks to end Alzheimer's? Okay, just a few hands. Okay. So basically, you've been hearing a lot of amazing information. And a lot of this is done because of the walk. It is a fundraiser, and it is always our hope that people will join, they'll start a team, and they'll raise money. However, it is also an opportunity to come and be a part of the community, in particular, the San Fernando Valley community. So there's no registration fee to be there. There's no fundraising expectation. All are welcome. And it's a approximately 2-mile walk. And you can do as much or as little as you'd like. And there are also vendors there that are a part of the community as well. So in a nutshell, this year's walk is on Sunday, October 19th. It'll be at LA Pierce College. The walk site will open at 8 a.m. We'll do our welcome ceremony at 9. About 9:15, we'll do our Promise Garden ceremony, which I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but we have flowers that are associated with specific connections. And we present these flowers to see who in the audience and how they're affected. And then at 9:20, the walking will begin. And it is a morning event. So when you get back, it usually is over by 11:30, and you still have the rest of your day. So just so you know, we do have some flyers out there on the table outside, not only of the walk information, but additional information about the association and many of the things that we're talking about here today. And please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me about the walk, but everything else, ask this woman.
Okay, so according to my phone, we have 3 minutes for questions. Oh, that was a decisive hand. So what do I contribute to lack of clinical trial volunteers? So have you ever tried to negotiate your way around UCLA and get the right person? Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges is actually trying to figure out where the clinical trials are and what I might be eligible for. So we do have a program called Trial Match, which I lovingly refer to as the eHarmony of clinical trials. And you fill out a quick survey online, and I'm cognitively fine. I had 2 family members with dementia. I'm willing to travel to UCLA, but not USC, so sort of your specifics. And it matches you with clinical trials in your area that you fit the eligibility. So it kind of just shortcuts that. And I also think people just assume, what I hear is, I don't want to be a guinea pig. Yeah, scared, yeah. So, and there are a whole bunch of different types of trials. There are some that are invasive. There are some that's a diet. There are some, I won't tell you that trial because you're going to have lunch next. Some are something online or a survey. So there are different types of trials for different thresholds of tolerance. Yeah. Yes. Is Alzheimer's worldwide? Yeah. So especially probably similar prevalence rates when you look at other countries like the US, with kind of smaller, more third world countries, probably lower rates, but mostly people don't live as long as well. Where is it least? I don't know where Alzheimer's is least prevalent. I've heard India. Oh, the blue zone. Have you heard of the blue zone? So the blue zone, people live to 100, cognitively intact, but they have incredible diets, incredibly healthy, lots of exercise. Loma Linda, I think Redondo Beach was trying to run one. Yeah. I don't know which country. I thought Blue Zone pulled me out of that hole. I don't.
There's some islands in the world that are part of that blue group.
Yeah. It's healthier lifestyles. Okay.
Are there any last questions? Hold on.
Could you provide some information to our members here about resources for them if they have a relative they're concerned about, and what the Alzheimer's Society can offer in terms of support?
So although we do fund and support research, kind of our bread and butter is working with families and supporting them on a day-to-day basis. So we offer support groups, which is practical information. You know, it's an unbelievable opportunity to kind of share experiences. Those are both in person. We have some virtual. We have some on online platforms. We do a lot in the area of education. Most of us don't plan on being a family caregiver, so these are trainings so individuals can learn communication, behavioral management, things like that. And then our 800 number is just a lifesaver. So that is a number anyone can call anytime, any day, with any question. And all of our programs are at no charge, completely accessible.
Well, join me in thanking Susan and the whole team for helping educate us about Alzheimer's, what's treatments available, how to stay healthy. Let's have a healthy lunch.